Okay, so hi, Beth. Nice to have
Hi,
you.
Tana. It's great
Yeah,
to be here.
wonderful. So today we have Beth Poss, who's going to join us and share a little bit about AAC and literacy, and I think more specifically the role of literacy instruction for the SLP. So I want to start out, Beth, by just having you introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about who you are and where you come from.
Sure. So I am a speech language pathologist by training. I also have a master's in education, and I spent 30 years in a local school district that I live in Maryland, Montgomery County Public Schools. I did kind of a little bit of everything as speech language pathologist, school-based speech language pathologist. I served as a member of our district's assistive technology team for 10 years. I was the special ed specialist, universal design for learning specialist for our elementary curriculum writing team for 3 years. And then I went into administration and supervised pre-K special education programs, and then ended up with 3 years as an assistant principal in an elementary school. So I feel like I really had, was able to have a really broad view of education in that time. And now I am working full-time for Lesson Picks, and I also do a lot of consulting and training with teams all around the country and starting some around the globe. So yeah, a bunch of different things. And literacy for learners who have complex communication needs is really, very near and dear to my heart. It's just always been, I've always just viewed that as that's the skill that our AAC users need to really, truly become completely independent communicators who can say anything they want. You have to have that literacy piece in there.
Yeah, you've had a full career so far, man, and you're not done yet. So really cool cool to hear where you come from. And as you kind of were walking through just now, your idea of where literacy fits in for complex communicators and how important it is for independence, it leads into my first question really nicely, which is, what is your overall teaching philosophy regarding literacy instruction for AAC users?
So, again, that belief that when we are working with AAC communicators, the goal is SNUG, right? Spontaneous, novel utterance generation. And that's that ability to say anything to anyone at any time, right? That you have complete control of what you want to be able to say. Well, because no matter how fantastic any communication system and vocabulary system that we have out there is, you can never have all the words that you need to be able to say programmed on a device. And even if you could, just imagine the challenges of navigating to all of that vocabulary. And that's where that literacy piece comes in. So when an AAC communicator can spell and can read efficiently enough, effectively enough, that they can come up with the words that are exactly what they want to say, right? So that's sort of where that piece comes from. Does every AAC communicator need to be completely literate in order to be an effective communicator? Absolutely not. But if we ignore the attempt to support these learners in becoming literate, then we are really doing them a disservice, right? And so I truly have the belief that all learners should be working on literacy skills, and all learners have the ability to become readers and writers at some capacity level.
Yeah, and that's leads me to kind of wonder, I know this is something that I've always wondered, and stuff I've come across in research has given a little bit of direction here, but not fully. What is that like effective enough reader really? Is there a number? Is there a skill level? Is there some sort of stage that we kind of settle on, or what does that mean?
No, I mean, I don't think we ever settle on any stage, but I think we too often, educators, speech language pathologists, families, whomever, kind of makes this decision, oh, we're only going to work on functional literacy, meaning we're only going to work on, oh, identifying environmental print, or being able to, so reading things like knowing which is the men's room and which is the women's room, or, being able to use visuals on a McDonald's menu to choose what they want to eat. Like, that's not enough. We close so many doors to individuals when we limit them to this so-called functional, academics, right? So it's the idea that that we can allow any learner to have that joy of books and that joy of literacy, like that should be available to them, and for them to be as independent as possible with that. So there's no like, okay, it's okay if you're, you make it to, emergent level, 1, or conventional level 5, or whatever it is that you're going to be. It's not about that. It's about opening doors and providing instruction that is grounded in the best practices for teaching reading and writing to anyone. So I recently heard Gretchen Hanser. She's a occupational therapist and educator out of New York, who works with kids with very complex bodies. And she made the statement that there's no secret special ed sauce for teaching reading and writing. It is teaching reading and writing to children, to learners with complex bodies, with complex communication needs. You use the same research evidence-based practices that you use to teach literacy to typically developing young children. You just overlay on top of that access methods, right? So that you are providing access for physical disabilities or visual disabilities, for attention, that it may take a lot longer. Part of that access may be a much more increased amount of time to accomplish the same skills. But good literacy instruction is good literacy instruction, whether it's for a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old who is just starting that journey of literacy instruction. And so that's really where we're talking about that idea of emergent literacy instruction, and what that looks like.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's not, AAC with literacy is not too far away from our thinking about communication with AAC, exactly. Right? So, and it sounds like adjusting not only the tools that are needed to achieve these skills, but also being patient about the trajectory and the timeline of those skills, and that we don't normally go to 6-year-olds and put them on a functional reading program if they don't have these complex needs. So why do we do it for our kids who do?
Exactly.
Yeah, very good point. I never really thought about it that way, and it's really nice to kind of I think it's liberating to think about it in terms of typical development for a lot of professionals, because we have really good maps for that.
We do, right? We have tons and tons of research around that.
Excellent. So thinking about my next question, what do you think are your top 3 tips for supporting literacy development for AAC users? I think you've given us one of probably many, which is follow typical development, but what are some others that come to mind?
So some of the other things that, I would kind of tips. So I'm trying to think like in terms of like something really practical is providing lots of opportunities for interacting with books. So it's just sort of flooding. Think about some of the kids that we're using, that we're working with, that have these complex bodies, that are complex communicators. And think about a typically developing young child. A typically developing young child who picks up a book and flips through it, right? A child who has had significant disabilities and perhaps a very medically complex early life may never have had that opportunity to like grab books off the shelf, open them up, turn them around, mouth them, all of that. they're so busy being cared for, figuring out their medical needs, figuring out their physical needs. It may even be somebody who's not significant physical needs. So maybe you've got somebody with autism, but you were so busy dealing with other things, right? So, nutrition or behavior, or working on that early language, or these may have been individuals, children who rejected books, like it wasn't something of their interest, right? That wasn't what that they were fascinated by, or you couldn't get that child to sit in your lap, right? So just immersing them in books, having that literacy experience, and finding out, and with that, finding out what interests them, right? So if you have a kid who is obsessed with, passionate about, it's a word I really like to use, like they're not perseverative on this, they are passionate about it, right? So if they are passionate about cars and trucks and wheels, then find books with cars and trucks and wheels that are about that, and read those books and give them those opportunities, and give them books that they can hold and interact with. And if they have significant physical disabilities, how can we bring those books to them, right? Making them accessible. So if it's a book that's I'm just looking for something like on my desk or something like that, right? So if it's like a board book like this, putting page fluffers in it, making it accessible for them, giving them opportunities on an iPad to be able to flip through pages of a book. I know families worry about screen time, but I don't view reading a book on an iPad as screen time, right? That's like different than like watching a video. And maybe it is watching a video. Maybe it's watching a video. If that's what that child's preference is, then let's give them a video of somebody reading a book where you're zooming in on the text and you're zooming in on the page. So that's the first thing, right? That's the first big tip. Just give them access to books. We also have to, so it's not just literacy, isn't just the reading part, it's the writing part. And so we also have to give them access to writing materials, to, so whether it is allowing that kid to, with washable markers, marker up the wall, or being able to paint in shaving cream in the bathtub, or getting magnetic letters on a cookie sheet, and allowing them to push those and move those around, or banging out on a keyboard, right? Those are all opportunities with literacy, with that written part of literacy, that we need kids to be able to go through, regardless of what their disability or ability might be. So giving them those opportunities for that. And again, finding the things that engage them. And so I guess that's like number 2. And then number 3, from the speech and language side of things, is use this as an opportunity for language, right? There's so much language that we can work on with books. So I talk to university students who are graduate students in speech language pathology multiple times throughout a week. I provide training to them on lesson picks, right? And one of the things that I say every single time that I do a lesson picks training to those groups of grad students is that if you can anchor your speech and language therapy sessions around a book, you are going to get, it's going to be so much easier. Your planning is going to be easier. The kid's going to be more engaged. You're going to be more engaged in it. There's so much that we can do with books. And so, using a book, talking about the language, doing, a picture walk of a book, right? So like if you've got your book, like just doing that picture walk, and reading it again, and not making it about quizzing or what's right or what's wrong, but just using that book, getting manipulatives to go with it, making it as interactive as they need to be. But using real books and using real literature, right? Using the things that we can use, and not making it about, can you answer this question? Can you answer this WH question that I'm going to put to you? So I guess, those would be my 3 big tips around literacy.
Yeah. So I'm hearing, like, first of all, opportunity, Right, and removing some of those early opportunity barriers by perhaps even working with other disciplines to fill the gaps in your own scope of competence regarding bodies and vision that are not necessarily operating the way we need them to for traditional books, and getting those supports in place so that kids can have positive experiences with books. And then it sounds like really just making them even themes. I did this a lot, and I still do, especially over telehealth. Man, books are so great to center your lessons because they're so transferable to the two-dimensional platform. And they set the stage for emotion and great language, and really just, we had a fireside chat yesterday with Narissa and Hillary from Communicare, and they were talking about how they use themes, much like you'd find in a book, not because they want to teach necessarily the particular words in the book, but because it gives a platform for expressing opinions and thinking about, what would you do if this happened to you? What would you do if you encountered a bear? So getting dialogue going around quizzing.
Right. And you made a really great point. It's also about that text to self connection, right? So it's the idea, like, if we were, I've got the book in my hand, I went walking. So if we were reading this and I went walking, what did you see? And, those of us that have read the 67 million times with kids know that that's a cat's tail, like that's peeking out. And so if that kid says, cat or meow or oh, or I have, or, whatever it is, oh, you have a cat at home. I don't have a cat at home. I have a dog at home. I wonder if we'll see a dog in the book, right? All of that kind of stuff that we can get where they have to have those text to self connections in order to make meaning. But that's where all that really rich language can come in as we are working with books.
Yeah, I agree. I've totally seen that happen with complex communicators, with typical language delay kind of presentation. It's really a fun way to tackle so many skills at one time. So when you're thinking about actually executing this idea of supporting literacy instruction, what are some of the barriers, such as opportunity, attitudes, access? You've talked about a couple around opportunity and access, but what are some of those barriers that you've encountered in trying to do this with kids?
I think one of the barriers is absolutely that that attitude. The barriers is when individuals do not presume competence, right? They just make an assumption that this individual, that this student, they're 15 years old already, or they're 10 years old and they haven't made progress in this, and it's not important at this time. We need to train them, they need to be, career readiness skills is what we need to work on. So working on those barriers around mindset of the adults in their lives, of what they can do. I would say, that's probably one of the biggest barriers, is that mindset of ability. And the reality is that every learner can make progress towards literacy. You might be starting at a different point, right, with someone than another. And you might be starting at simply being able to, have some concepts of print and understanding that a book is a meaningful experience, right? Like just that engaging with a book, engaging with text is meaningful and enjoyable. And that kind of takes you to, one of the other barriers is finding what is interesting, right? So I've got the book I Went Walking, which is perfect for my 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, maybe even 7-year-old. But I'm not going to use this book with my 10-year-old or 15-year-old. So it's finding what's going to be interesting to them. So I'm not going to have a book I Went Walking about, that's this, but I might have a created book that's I Went Walking. What did I see? I saw the Gap store. I saw, the ice cream store. I saw, Justin Bieber, whatever it is, right? So it's finding what is going to engage. So using that learner's interest, doing an interest profile, finding what they like, what are they passionate about, right? I said that with the trucks and the cars, but with older kids, it might be, the music that they like, or the things that they like to eat, or the thing, any of that. So finding that those resources, which oftentimes means creating our own resources, right? You're not necessarily going to find resources at an emergent literacy level, although there certainly are commercially available things out there. You might not be able to find those as easily. So either creating them or finding them on other resources. And one of my favorites for that is Tar Heel Reader, which is a fabulous website. We can talk a little bit more about that too in terms of the communication strategy, but finding those resources for those emergent readers to be able to engage in, so that they can find reading and literacy a meaningful activity in their lives.
Yeah, and kind of speaking to that piece that you were describing earlier about some kids having early experiences of being really disinterested in books, maybe even averse to the experience of sitting with a caregiver and enduring perhaps an overly demanding book reading session or something like that. I know I've seen a few of those in my time.
You will sit in my lap for the next 20 minutes while I read to you.
And we will read every page and every word on it.
Right. And maybe it's about letting that kid flip through that book, even if it's okay. Like, oh, they turned it. I see. What do you see? Oh, wait, you think we're going to see something else there? Right. However quickly they need to, having those experiences, and that it's okay if they don't stay on that page, until we find the thing that maybe that does capture them.
Yeah. So thinking also about those situations, maybe between professionals and kids, or even professionals helping caregivers understand how to modify experiences, what would you say are some of the catalysts that really make this kind of instruction successful? You've mentioned a few already. I'm going to reiterate them just to bring those to the head. So I feel like you're saying adapt to interests.
Yeah.
You're saying adapt to needs, support physical needs, visual needs. You're saying assume that the child is capable. So adapt attitudes. Anything else you would add?
Well, I would say, there's certain things that we have to start with, right? So one of the first things that we just simply have to start with is the alphabet, right? That's a critical piece in reading. And so making that alphabet instruction and meaningful, that's part of those print concepts, right? Like, if you look at a print concepts checklist that somebody understands that this is a picture and that this is text, that these are words and this is a picture, but that this has something to do with this picture, right? So, starting with those print concepts, with learning the alphabet, making the alphabet meaningful. And there's a lot of really good things that we see happening in kindergarten classes, right? So if you're in a good kindergarten class, you're going to see that kindergarten teacher talking about what a student's name starts with. Well, we need to do that with our older kids too. That's probably the most meaningful text, the most meaningful letters to any individual is the letters in their name. So that's like often a place to start. Like, let's find the letters in your name, and not just the first letter of your name. So we're not just going to go looking around for B's for Beth, but we're also going to look around for where do we see an E and where do you see a T? Because there's a T in Beth, and where's there an H? And there's, so, the whole philosophy around teaching the alphabet. And if we want to connect that back to like our speech language pathologists, let's think about all of those things. Like E is for elephant, and E is for egg, and E is for, I was going to say eagle, but that might not exactly be like, the thing that the person, but again, connecting it back to that vocabulary and those experiences, and all of those things. And so we can make that a part of our language learning experience too, right? It doesn't have to just be thinking about it only from, we can never separate literacy and language. They're so intertwined, right? You don't get one without the other. I mean, you can have language without literacy, but you can't have literacy without language. It's a part of it.
Yeah. And thinking, it seems like what you're proposing really is a starting point is to just add opportunity to have access and exposure to the print in your sessions might be like a catalyst, right? Just starting at the right point, which comes from understanding what's typical, right? In development of literacy skills, which I don't know about everybody else, but I didn't get enough instruction around literacy in my graduate program for learners without complex needs.
Right. I don't think we do. I think I actually did a poll on Facebook a while back to see, like, on an SLP Facebook group, to see, did you have a literacy course in your graduate training? And while there were a number of people that had, I certainly didn't. Now, I'm old as dirt, and I certainly didn't have one. But I don't think it is necessarily like a commonplace part. It might be that there's some things touched on, but I don't think it, and that's okay. That's why we need to educate ourselves about what literacy is. And, if you are working in a school setting, for example, you should have lots of people that you should be, as a speech language pathologist, that you can go to learn about that. And if you're not working in a school setting, there's a lot of resources out there. Like, I highly recommend Karen Erickson's book, Comprehensive Literacy for All. I love this it's like a little tiny book, right? You can read it, in one sitting. And it's called No More Teaching a Letter a Week. And it's a great one on teaching. It's about alphabet teaching, like the kind of like passe idea of you teach, and this is for gen ed. This is talking like to kindergarten teachers and pre-K teachers, right? That you teach A, you're doing A this week and you're doing B. And the research is that, no, we will not get enough exposure to letters. You won't even get through 2 cycles of letters in the course of a school year if you're doing that. So you need to do like a letter. It's the idea, letter of the day, right? And multiple letters of the week, right? So kind of those ideas. This has just sort of been a Bible for me for a really long time. It's a handbook of early literacy research, which really just goes into, it's a tome, right? This is not a quick read or a beach read like I would say the others are, but it's a great resource to look up and find some of that information about literacy. And I think as speech language pathologists, when we are working, we have an obligation to it. It is in our AACCCS scope of practice to address literacy. And whether you're talking about learners with complex communication needs, or whether you're talking about learners maybe with learning disabilities, or we know that there's a higher incidence of issues with spelling and reading for individuals who have speech and language impairments, because of the relationship to speech and language, to being able to write. If you can't pronounce a word correctly, it's a lot harder for you to learn how to spell that word correctly because of the mental and auditory model that you have in your head so it's part of our scope of practice, and it's something that we do need to learn to, if we didn't get training on it, or if that training was a really long time ago, you need to get training on it and make it a part of your practice.
Yeah, and it sounds like really we have a primary role to advocate for our kids as well, when we know they come to the table with these histories of needs in speech and language development, and then of course our complex communicators who come to the table with so many areas of need, that it really may be us that comes out and says, have we considered the fact that we need to be focusing on literacy, and maybe even really hitting it hard early on, right? If we're going to take a long time, then we've got to not wait. I would assume.
Needs to be a part of there's no reason you can't, there's 2 different ways that we can go about, and both are good ways, right? You can have explicit reading instruction and embedded reading instruction. And I should say literacy instruction. It's not just reading, it's writing too. So you can have explicit, that means like, this is the letter A. Do you see how it's made? A, apple, whatever, that's explicit, right? Embedded is, we're reading this book and, I see a cat. Oh, look at that. Hey, we were talking about the letter C. Did you notice that the word cat starts with the letter C, right? So that's that more embedded as opposed to, that explicit. But we can do both. But as a speech language pathologist, we might be doing more of the embedded in our language therapy kind of situations. It also means, though, that we have an obligation to understand what's best practice and what is not effective. And understanding the difference between using, so with our augmentative communicators, communicators, we're using symbols for them. Most augmentative communicators are using symbol-based systems, and there's text with those symbols. We don't typically not have the text there with those symbols, but we're using symbols with it, which is different to communicate, because that's so you can quickly visually locate an object, an image that you're communicating with, so that you can attach meaning to it when you do not have the literacy skills yet to decode the word that's on there. Sometimes it's for certain systems. So for example, like if you're using Unity, where there's very specific visual information coded into that image, and it represents multiple words or categories, you're using that visual representation. But with reading, it's the text, it's the letters, and we need to focus on having individuals learn to read and decode, not to use a picture to cue them what that word is. That does not go along with best practices in reading instruction. And as a matter of fact, there had been in the not too distant past, a philosophy around whole language and reading instruction, where you would do a cueing system. Like if you were teaching a typically developing kid to read, you'd say, oh, if you can't figure out that word, look at the picture. And what is the picture? We don't even prescribe to that method of teaching reading, right? We want kids to decode word. Yes, the pictures give us clues about and information about it, but you're not learning to read a word based on the picture that is with it. And you're certainly not going to learn to read words by having a picture for each word. And so that's like one of the things I think as speech language pathologists is we have to be able to understand the difference between using symbols for communication, picture symbols for communication, and not using picture symbols for literacy instruction, and to be able to kind of separate those out.
And so you've given a couple great resources for people who are interested to go and learn more, a few textbooks, which I am happy to link to this episode. I'm wondering, where else do you think individuals should go if they want to know whatever level of this continuum of competence in this skill? Where would they go for more information on how to learn about it?
Well, I think there's a lot out there. There's a lot of great podcasts. There's a lot of great blogs and resources. But I'm going to be starting a course soon on AAC Literacy and the SLP. So that will be one place through Accessible. So I'm going to be starting in June a course, a 6-session course specifically around this topic of AAC literacy and the SLP. It's going to be on Accessible. I'm really excited about it. It'll be 6 one-hour sessions where we'll really be able to take a lot of this information that I've just been sort of casually discussing here and flesh it out a lot more, so that a speech language pathologist who is working with individuals with complex communication needs can walk away and feel like they have some tools to be able to utilize in supporting those students, those learners with literacy. And again, it may not be so that you can become the expert in literacy, but so that you can utilize the work that you're doing with an AAC communicator in supporting their communication by incorporating literacy into it, right? We want our AAC communicators to get to snug and to be able to have that ability to communicate with anyone, anywhere, about anything, that spontaneous novel utterance generation. So yeah. There's lots of other people that I can tell you, if you ever see anything that Karen Erickson is doing, a webinar, an article, read that. Caroline Musselwhite is another one. Caroline Musselwhite's a speech language pathologist who is doing just fabulous things in the world of literacy and AAC and complex communicators. So those are, 2 of my go-to gurus.
Yeah, and I've seen your syllabus, Beth, and you not only are going to have laundry lists of resources for everybody, including, I imagine, a lot from these pioneers in the AAC and literacy field, but you have this beautiful breakdown, I think, in your series where you're, I believe, really coming to it at more of an introductory level. So if you were thinking about the way you want to present this information compared to how you've received it as a more seasoned professional, what do you think that you would say sets your training apart from some of those that you've taken?
I think it's what you said. We're going to start at this like, what is the developmental steps of literacy? What does that mean? Like, what do typically developing kids go through as they develop those emergent literacy skills, right? And then how can we take some specific strategies that we know are really effective for moving those learners along and lay the communication on top of it. Like, so it's not like, I'm not going to be talking to our audience as if they are, a reading teacher or a special educator, although they are more than welcome to be a part of this training. But as a speech language pathologist, where does your role fit into this? So that if your goals are to develop communicative competency, but how can we bring literacy into it so that you're working together, right? The same way that we want that classroom teacher to be addressing the language part of things, right? It's a part, you can't tease it. You just can't tease those things apart.
Yeah. Well, I know I'm excited to take it because this is not an area that I'm comfortable with. Although it is validating too. If you've at all done any literacy work, I mean, I've learned so much having my own children,
right?
Because I finally got a chance to see what does this actually look like for kids to learn how to read. And it's been really fun to just speckle in these little bits of print awareness and phonology, phonological awareness, and just even being able to understand the importance of having literacy features in the plan for AAC systems.
Yeah. And
right.
And we're going to take a look at all of that. We're going to take a look at the developmental stages. What is emergent literacy? The developmental stages of emergent literacy, alphabet, phonemic, alphabet knowledge, phonological awareness, looking at shared reading, looking at writing, and then how do we put that all together and what are resources that we can use? And so we'll kind of wrap it up with that, kind of putting a bow on it. And so that hopefully every session, folks will walk away with strategies that they can use, the next day with students that they're working with. But by the end of the 6 sessions, that folks will be feeling like they are really doing right by the students that they're working with and supporting them as speech language pathologists in addressing literacy and language together.
Yeah, it sounds awesome. I can't wait. So I'm going to make sure we have all the information about the course included in this post. Is there anything else you'd like to wrap up with? Any closing words of literacy wisdom for everybody?
I think the big message is, I don't know about you, but to me, I don't know what my life would be like without books and without reading. My world is richer for the worlds that I travel to in the books that I read. And I want every child, student, individual that I have the opportunity to touch to have that same feeling that a book is going to open the world to them. And so, that's how I've always looked at it. Like, I want everybody to have that same experience with reading. It might not be the experience I have, but I want it to be, there for them.
Yeah, I think that's really important because it's joy, right?
Yes,
it's not just the access to knowledge, it's also access to joy and the same joys that you and I have, having bodies that work for us and literacy skills we can access. So I agree. I see my kids even just learning more about their world through the books that they read, and would love to be a part of that for every kid I touch. So Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
All right, Beth, thanks so much for your time today.
All right, thank you.